Good.
All right, Mayor, it is 7:01 and you're live.
Okay, let's call this meeting to order. The August 4th, 2020 meeting of the City of Oneonta Common Council is hereby called to order. I will call the roll, starting with Councilmember Murphy.
Here.
Councilmember Davies.
Here.
Councilmember Risberger.
Here.
Councilmember Lepari Shu.
Here.
Councilmember Carson.
Here.
Councilmember Harrington.
Here.
Councilmember Rafter.
Here.
And Councilmember Drenick.
Here.
Okay. The gang's all here. Thank you. Temporarily. Okay. All right. Well, they said we needed rain. I don't think we needed a whole month's worth in one day. It looks like the worst of the storm is over. There may still be some small storms hitting us as the night goes on. So far, it doesn't look like we're seeing a threat of flooding. Chief Pigeon will be keeping an eye out all night on the river and on the creeks and other points of potential flooding. But it looks like we will probably, hopefully at any rate, get through this without any significant flooding. I want to talk a little bit about, we're all aware that we had a bit of an increase in COVID-19 cases here in the city of Oneonta recently. We did so well for so long, a tribute to how well people stayed home. We knew that once we reopened, there was a potential for an increase, and we did see that. Reality is that in the month of July, we had more new cases of COVID-19 in the city than we had in March, April, May, and June combined. Now, that is certainly a wake-up call and a bit of a warning, but there is some better news to that as well. I spoke with Heidi Bond yesterday at the County Department of Health. She did tell me that 9 of the cases in the month of July were tied to 2 different individuals who had tested positive, and 7 additional people who were found to have had contact with one of these 2 individuals wound up testing positive. So that's good news in 2 ways. It's a little bit of a relief. One, it tells us that it was not a random spread through the community and that it was 2 little tiny clusters. And it also tells us that the contact tracing that the Department of Health is doing is working, because they were able to notify people who had been in contact with the people who tested positive, get them tested, and identify that they were positive also, so that they could quarantine. So while the increase is certainly a wake-up call, it is not as bad as it could be, in that it was isolated to some extent and a result of the contact tracing, and knowing that that works, it was good to hear. The other thing that there's been a lot of talk about lately is the return of the college students. Now, I have to tell you, a day doesn't go by that I don't have people call me, email me, come up to me, and express their fears and concerns about the return of 7,000 college students. And I get it, they're real. 7,000 people of any age, families, coming into a new community this size all at the same time would be a concern. So it's not just that they're college students, but it becomes even more concerning because everything we read is that one of the biggest factors in transmission have been young people and their lifestyle. So people's concerns are legitimate and they are real. The other thing that we're hearing routinely is that small towns and rural communities, are not being immune to this. So here is how I see the situation right now. Both colleges have assumed responsibility for keeping their students safe while on campus, and they're going to extreme measures in doing so, and I applaud them for that. Visiting friends, eating with friends, group activities, socializing, athletics, in-person classrooms, and more are not permitted on campus. And again, I commend the colleges for this. It's a lot of work, a lot of expense, and enforcement will be a job for them. And it's certainly not what their students are looking forward to as part of their college experience. However, the responsibility for keeping the students safe when they're off campus falls to us. And if our practices do not follow the intent of the college's safety plan, I feel we are shirking our responsibility to the college, to the students, and to the community. And after all, what sense does it make to tell students that they must sacrifice all of their social activities while they're on campus, but then it's life as normal off campus? Big groups, crowded buses, house parties, and so on. I mean, we all know that the virus is just as happy to infect people when they're off campus as they are on campus. I've had extensive discussions with both college presidents, President Dragovich and President Morris, and I believe they're on the same page. They don't want their students to get sick. And they recognize that they can get sick off campus just as easily as they can get sick on campus, and they are committed. I did this Sunday have about a 1-hour phone call with the president of the SUNY Student Association, a young man named Timothy Nolan, a very smart and mature young man who I've met previously. I won't say that we're completely see eye to eye, but we both understand the urgency. We both understand each other's position. And of course, he has to answer to the students who are his constituents, for what they hope to have access to. But we did agree that we would continue communication. He has my cell phone number, and we will talk regularly and work together to find the proper balance. Now, our plan so far, which has been developed in consultation with Chief Brenner, with David Hoteling, with Diane Jorgensen, is as follows. When it comes to house parties, there's no excuse for us to not be as consistent as is possible with the on-campus restrictions. On campus, there's an expectation that there will be minimal visitation. We will have the same expectation here in the city. Our expectation will be, just like on campus, there will be minimal visitation. And the Oneonta Police Department will be strict. And any gathering that they deem to be a threat to public health or that creates a public nuisance will be enforced strictly. And the penalties will be high because the stakes are high and we need to keep everybody safe. We will establish a dedicated phone line, a dedicated number, which will be published to all so that people can report any concerns they have of seeing something that they consider a threat to public health. And this is not just targeted at students. This is at anywhere that they see. They won't have to go through the switchboard. They won't have to go through the dispatcher. It'll be a number that the police chief will set up that when it rings in, they will know that it is a report for immediate attention to a possible threat to public health. As I've said before, We're establishing what I'm calling is local control room. There will be student representatives from SUNY on it, staff, faculty, city officials. We'll meet a minimum of once a week, more often if necessary. Analyze how things are going, talk about problems, if there are problems, talk about steps to take to mitigate the problems, and take joint responsibility for keeping people safe and making any changes that we need. Now that goes both ways. If things are going really well, we can work together to relax a little bit and possibly ease some of the restrictions. We're in this together and we'll work together on it. Transportation. Again, remaining consistent with the on-campus safety plan and restrictions. The chief, David Hoteling, and I all agreed that we should limit transportation to essential functions. Transportation to nightlife would make a mockery of the college's restrictions that are designed to keep people safe. It would send a confusing, mixed message to all and would put everybody at risk. I've discussed this with President Morris. The college administration has shown support for this as being consistent with on-campus expectations. And again, I've discussed it with the Student Association president, and we will work hand in hand with the Student Association to identify the times and locations that essential services such as shopping, getting to the library in the evenings, if there are evening classes, I don't really know that there will be. Whatever the needs are, David will work together with the Student Association to meet those needs while not supporting and facilitating crowded bars and nightlife. After all, every one of us has given up our nightlife for the last 4 months. Most of us will be continuing to do that. I haven't eaten in a restaurant in 5 months. We are only asking all members of the community, including students, to take the same precautions. Very few people, I think, have actually witnessed a downtown college bus run, particularly one returning from downtown. David has, I know, and he can talk more about that. I will say that we did ask the college and the university police department if they wanted to provide support for loading and monitoring buses, and they did indicate that this was not a priority that they wished to support. And we gave them that opportunity to do so. In summary, I see it as it's the college's responsibility to keep students safe on campus. It is our responsibility to be just as diligent in keeping them safe when they're off campus. If we fail to do so, we make all the restrictions, all the enforcement, all the expense that the college is undertaking meaningless and in turn jeopardizing lives. David, I'll give you an opportunity to chime in. Hoteling.
Thank you, Mayor. I really have nothing else to add. You hit all the points pretty well. It's going to be definitely a different semester. We are having issues covering runs as it is with drivers, but I think we can come up with a good plan and cover any essential services that the students may need. We have pretty much come to an agreement with Hillside in the last day or so, and still waiting on SUNY and Hartwick to get back to me. But we are moving forward with Hillside. So we're going to be giving them a few extra essential services that they asked for. That's about all I have to add.
Yeah, and as I said, and I explained to the Student Association president, if things go well, if compliance is good, we're not seeing any problems, then we can start increasing the runs. And if things go worse than expected, we'll have to react to that. This is really an unknown. We really don't know what to expect. We need to start cautious, monitor it closely. We'll be meeting regularly with the students, and be flexible. I think flexibility is key here because we are in uncharted territory. Questions? Len?
Thank you, Gary. So just out of curiosity, the 2 individuals that passed COVID-19 on to 7 individuals, did it stop there or did it continue on, or is it too early to tell?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. The local control room that you mentioned, who's going to be participating in that?
Okay, I haven't put together the names yet. I do have a draft. I don't have it in front of me right now. I asked President Morris to put together names of students, faculty and staff. She has done so. I haven't seen the names. She told me she has them. We're going to include a representative of the council. Police chief will be on it. David Hoteling will be on it. I'm open to other suggestions. I think we should have a member of the community, a citizen at large on it, who interacts with college students. I'm certainly open to any other suggestions.
Okay, thank you.
So if anybody has any, or anybody has a strong feeling or request to be on it, I do want to include a council member who is one of the council members that is one of the wards that has the greatest concentration of college students. I think for the most part, it's the 3rd, 4th, and 7th wards that have the greatest concentration. If you see it differently, Mark, maybe if they see 2nd is more, please let me know.
Yeah, I think I have Smith Hall and a couple other ones, the townhouses, but that's it. The phone line that you mentioned is going to go directly to the OPD dispatcher. And this is going to be anonymous, or is this somebody that in order to report on a neighbor, they're going to give their own name?
No, it can be anonymous. Where it's not going to be like when you call the police, the first thing they ask you is for your name and address. If somebody wants to give their name, they're welcome to, but they're not going to be required to.
So why wouldn't we want to require that? I mean, this is going to be a pretty serious charge that they're charging somebody with a public health not disturbance, but infraction, if you will. Isn't it?
Well, I
it's
think
something if we're going to the measure of having a dedicated phone line to city staff, that we would want to know who this person is, so that we don't have. I'd hate to see that we have prank phone calls or people that are taking the ability of being anonymous, but not really making factual or truthful.
Yeah. Because like I said, I'm not locked in on anything. I'm open to being flexible.
Okay.
We're in a situation we've never experienced before. I certainly take the chief's advice on it and be open to changing course. And if the chief feels strongly, anyway, I certainly would defer to him.
Okay.
The original thought was that the biggest problem we have with monitoring house parties is that we can't be everywhere. Police can't be everywhere. We don't know that they're happening until it's too late. They're indoors. And by the time you find out about them, you've had 50 students on top of each other, for a couple of hours. This is just a way to have more eyes out there so we can get notification quicker, so we can put the message out that house parties are, don't even bother. It's really, we're trying to be a deterrent and not to penalize people. We get the message out. If you're going to have a house party, it's going to get broken up, so don't even consider it.
Okay.
But, I think we have to be, and everything we're doing here, I don't think any of us know for sure what's going to work and what isn't and how things are going to play out. I think flexibility is key.
Okay. And then if you don't mind, the last question that I had is with regards to the local businesses, the pubs, what are you looking for or from them as a responsible business owner? Obviously, they're going to be complying the best that they can with regards to the New York State health regulations, given COVID and all the preventions. Is this something that you're seeing that you're going to be asking this council to ask OPD to be going inside these businesses to actually put eyes on?
That is the chief's plan. His chief's plan is twofold. One is to visit all of the bars beforehand, let them know that the police are taking this seriously, and that we will be reporting noncompliance to the State Liquor Authority. We've already, I say we, but the police have already reported one incident of noncompliance to the State Liquor Authority. I can tell you the SLA is taking this very, very seriously. I mean, they are suspending licenses very quickly because they feel it's very, very important. The other thing is that, you know, the bars have really tough regulations right now that Cuomo has put on there. It's going to be, they're not going to do any less business because the students aren't being transported downtown. They're restricted to having, everybody must be seated in order to drink. You must order food at the same time. If you're sitting at the bar, you must be 6 feet apart. So the number of people that can be in a bar right now is very, very small. So, you know, I'm sure that they will be, you know, at their maximum capacity one way or another. But by not facilitating students coming downtown with the intent to drink, it makes it easier on the bar owners to enforce, as well as prevents what we see is students lining up and gathering in large groups, waiting outside a bar to get in.
Okay.
But
Thank
the
you for answering my
enforcement is,
questions.
yeah, enforcement is being left up to the police chief. You know, I'm certainly not telling him how to enforce. You know, police, they make their decisions using discretion as part of police work, and they will use discretion as they do in enforcement of all laws.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. All right, none of this is easy, and there's a lot of unknowns, and there's a lot of difficult decisions to be made. You know, for me, the bottom line is err on the side of caution and safety, and not jeopardize lives. Just as I said, the stakes are high. Okay, let's go to board and commission reports. Commission on Community Relations and Human Rights. I believe that is Councilmember Murphy.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, we met on Thursday. I believe it was the 23rd of July. So just a little under 2 weeks ago. We had a full meeting. It was a little bit shorter because we had a couple of folks that were telecommuting even more than they are now. The couple that were not in their homes. But the big item that we discussed was using some of the remainder of the board's funding that we have for the year and setting up a grant program for those interested in applying to various projects that would be within the scope of the mission of the Board on Community Relations and Human Rights. The details are still being worked out, still looking at the budget. That was the major item that we discussed for the meeting, and we will be meeting again in about 2.5 weeks.
Any questions? Anybody? Thank you, Luke. Parks and Recreation, that would be Councilmember Lepari Shu.
Hey, yes. Parks and Rec met last night. We heard from a couple of petitioners through Parks Director Lou Lansing. there are a couple things that are going to be coming through council that have the commission and Lou's support. So Tribe Yoga is looking to do classes in the park, socially distant. The Alzheimer's walk, actually, I don't know that there's any action on this, but they've canceled their walk and they're just going to do a display of pinwheels. It's just going to be an afternoon. It might actually be this coming Sunday. I didn't write the date down, but one of these upcoming Sundays. We also heard from the family of someone who has a memorial in the park. And it's the big stone kind of fountain thing when you come in from like River Street area and over the viaduct. So evidently that I don't ever, and it was pretty unanimous that no one really remembers a time when it was a fountain, but apparently that's what it's supposed to be. It was dedicated in 1922. So her family was hoping that we could do some work on that, and it is on the plan, but obviously with COVID and things like that, probably not going to happen in the near future. Lou gave the parks report and discussed the ecology of Hodges Pond, which was very fascinating. We talked a lot about finances and just how best to maintain our parks and be able to accomplish our goals. So the dog park came up, and I did mention, I saw that Greg is on the call, and unless another one of the council members remembers, I don't think it was the last council meeting. I think it was the meeting before that. We reallocated the funds that had been previously set aside for the dog park this year to a higher priority project. And so Greg, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I let the Parks and Rec committee know that, and they were pretty bummed, but also kind of understand. And we're in the process of forming kind of a committee, subcommittee around that, so that'll give them some time to kind of coordinate that in the budget for 2021. So, oh, my internet is so bad.
Greg, do you want to talk about that? Because I don't know if anybody's aware that money's been reallocated from the dog park to a different project this year. I wasn't aware of it.
I recall some discussion about possibly not proceeding with the dog park right away, and due to this, the committee that's been formed to explore possible additional funding options as well as management of the dog park, pushing that to 2021. And the funding that was included in the 2020 budget for the dog park was intended to come out of the Parks and Recreation Reserve, I believe. Jenny, jump in if I'm incorrect.
You're correct.
Similar to the athletic court resurfacing funds. So that's something that the council could still act on at any time to move forward with. However, our discussion was to, instead of spending that money this year, spend some of that Parks and Rec reserve money on the Damaski Field infield improvements. I think that's where that discussion happened, Katie.
Okay.
That said, that the Parks and Recreation Reserve, that money is there in the reserve. It can be spent for whatever purpose the council deems appropriate. So that doesn't necessarily mean that the dog park is off the table if the council wants to push forward with that this fall. It was just our recommendation in that discussion to maybe consider that in 2021 to give us a little more time to figure out how the dog park will be managed and kind of get that volunteer committee organized and possibly come up with some fundraising effort. That's a consideration.
Okay, great.
Katie?
Yeah, that sounds familiar. I remember, I did recall correctly at the meeting yesterday that was infield resurfacing. So I'm really happy to hear that. Yeah, and that was kind of the general vibe of the commission as well, was, that we'll be able to try to figure out how much it's going to cost to maintain the dog park and things like that, and just go into it with more concise plans. We are still pulling for the court resurfacing project and the pickleball courts this year. So hopefully that will happen. But Lou just wanted to kind of bring to everyone's awareness that a lot of general maintenance and upkeep in the parks that aren't things that people would necessarily notice, like replacing some grates at the Wilbur Park pool and just things like that, that people would only notice if it had gotten really bad. That kind of stuff is still going on. So there is still maintenance and things like that going on. We also just floated the idea, and I'm partnering with OCCA, and I want to reach out to Kano about it as well, about incorporating arts and nature education into our city parks as well, in a more prominent way. So kind of it.
Good report. Questions? Okay, thank you, Katie. Zoning, Housing Board of Appeals. Let's see, that is that Rafter?
It is.
ZBA? That's what I thought.
The zoning board of appeals meeting was last night. There were 6 items on the agenda. I'll just run through them quickly. The first had to do with signage at 41 South Main Street. It had to do with a variance, an area variance for a sign on a wall that wasn't parallel to the street. That was approved. The second item had to do with 80 Clinton Street, which was a request for a short-term rental variance. The applicants did not appear at the meeting, and so there was no consideration of that. And apparently they're going to be asked to apply again. There was a third item, a use variance, and had to do with Ward 6 property, currently used by the Moose Lodge. It was a request to allow a retail space and storage facility to go up there. The applicant had not, in fact, purchased the property as yet. He was trying to get an early read on it. And the discussion basically was not positive for the applicant. The sense of the zoning board is that some parcel that size should be held for residential use or residential development, and that it just wasn't an appropriate use of the property, so he was rejected, even though he was not in a position to really make the request. 8892 West Street, another short-term rental variance. Again, a no-show. The applicant did not appear. No representative of the applicant appeared. And that was simply let go. And the applicant will need to apply again. Then we have 22 Valley View Street, where a new driveway, a couple of feet of the driveway was being discussed. And after review of it, the application was approved. It seemed to be not really a problem in terms of drainage in that particular property. The sixth and last had to do with 54 Maple Street. That also was a request for a short-term rental. It was posited by the applicant as renting one apartment, or permitting one apartment to be a short-term rental. It was pointed out by our code officer that that was not, it could not be limited to that. The variance would go with the property. There aren't variances granted for one unit in a 3-unit building. And so that application was rejected. So that completed the meeting, and that's the summary.
Questions, anyone? Okay. Thank you, John. With that, let's go to committee reports. Planning Committee, Councilmember Risberger.
Yes, thank you. We met on July 27th. We only had 3 items on the docket that day. The first was a discussion on potentially adding a crosswalk on Main Street between Ford Ave and Deet Street. And this was an item that was brought forward by a couple constituents that were concerned that they would come through the Deet Street parking lot, going to the farmer's market, and have to walk all the way back up to Deet Street, cross, and then back over to Muller Plaza. And in the past, it had been brought up by Gary that in the past there was discussion of adding a crosswalk, and there was concern about potentially backing up traffic too much on Main Street. So we talked to the police chief, and the concern was, is there a lot of jaywalking that happens at this point anyway? And he thinks that this is something that would be a good job to give a student intern in the fall. So there was also some general agreement that the Lost project has the potential for increasing pedestrian traffic through the private property of Community Bank. If you're not aware, the Community Bank area, people walk through there. That's private property between Deet Street and Main Street. So we're going to look at this again later this fall. We'll talk to the police chief, see if he has a student intern, and see if we can do a little bit of further research on it. Another item was the city website. This is actually on the agenda for tonight. That we had received a detailed write-up of a comparison of 2 different bids on the city website work. And this was moved to the Finance Committee, so I'm assuming they liked what they saw, and it's on the agenda. And lastly was the Muller Plaza Westcott lot permitting process. So Carrie Harrington wrote up an adjusted permitting form that would include the Westcott lot fence, and the idea is to include a maximum 7 days, and we'll include a space on the form where you can put a percentage of the fence that you're requesting. And the idea is that we can go back and review this in a year and see what the compliance is to this, if we need to make any adjustments to it, or if we want to discontinue it altogether. So that's on the agenda for this evening for discussion.
Thank you. Questions? Okay, good. Finance, Human
Oh, Len's
Resources
got it.
Committee.
Gary,
Did you have
Len's
a question? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Len.
Dave, I just wanted to make sure we're going to discuss the economic developer at our next meeting also.
At our next meeting, the planning meeting?
At planning, remember? I thought we said we were going to talk about that also.
Yes,
Oh.
actually, I've got this. I wasn't going to review the agenda for our next meeting, but that's on my list of 4 items I put on there. So yeah, we'll be discussing it.
I just thought maybe it'd be of interest to some of the other council members that were going to be discussing that.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about this piece later. Len and I were talking that we kind of ran out of time in that meeting. And so with our committee being back to finance, we're feeling pressured with our committee to get things accomplished in an hour. And we didn't even get to the discussion of the economic developers. So, but we can discuss this at the end of tonight's meeting and see if we can come up with a solution.
Sounds good, Dave. Thank you.
Feel free to change the time. You know, if the committee wants to change the time because that time is not working for you, feel free.
Easier said than done, though, Gary. You know that.
But you are free to do so. Finance, Human Resource Committee, Councilmember Carson.
Thank you, Mayor. I believe Ginny sent out our minutes to the council members a little after 6 tonight. So I apologize on behalf that you didn't get an opportunity to read it. But basically, we met on July 27th. We talked about the teen center, agreed to extending the contract. I believe Ian has been running that for several years, and this was a contract that, if I remember correctly, had been in place for several years also. Ian does a fabulous job with the teen center. Really proud of the fact that he dedicates so much time and effort to our young people. I appreciate Ian for doing that. Ginny moved on to surplus items. I believe that list was sent out to all the council members. I did raise the question about the vehicles because my wife and I, we walk on the Greenway Trail quite often, and I noticed that there was quite a few vehicles, and she said those vehicles are already on the auction website, I believe is what she said. So looks like we're moving forward with all our surplus items. David, Hoteling alluded to the contract negotiations with SUNY Oneonta, Harper College, and Hillside Commons. We had talked about that. He briefed us along with Mayor Herzig on discussions that have been happening. Probably the one item that we spent the most time on was the Glenwood Creek Culvert project. After our meeting, I spoke with Greg and just asked him if he could maybe help council members get more of a visual of the scope by giving visuals to us. And so I'm sure you all received in your email this week some great pictures and overall look. And thank you, Greg, for listening to those suggestions and sending them out to the council members. I see heads nodding. Hopefully that kind of gave you a better picture of the scope of this project. It's more involved than you probably, I'm sure most of us haven't stopped and put our head over the railing and looked down there in the Glenwood Creek project. So thank you, Greg, for doing that. And then we had some budget transfers, but as Dave, Councilmember Risberger just mentioned, we were dynamic enough of a committee that we took planning, passing the idea of moving forward on the city website just a few minutes before our meeting started, and we also moved that forward for you to review tonight and talk as a council whole if you want. What else? There was something else. Oh, and then at the end of our meeting and discussion, the mayor's put on there that we will discuss the Glenwood Creek Culvert project.
Thank you, Len. Questions? Okay, if there are none.
And look at that.
I'm sorry,
And we
go
got our
ahead.
meeting done in 15 minutes.
Was it really 15 minutes? Okay, a consent agenda. Number one, motion that the council approves the minutes of the regular meeting, which was held on July 21st, 2020. Two, motion that the council approves the warrants totaling $233,748.50. And that the same be placed on the Director of Finance's desk for payment as presented. Okay. Number three, motion that the council authorizes the mayor to sign a separation agreement with employee number 028001. This would be effective August 15th of 2020. Subject to review by the city attorney. Four, motion that the council authorizes the mayor to sign a separation agreement with employee number 016002. This would be effective December 31st, 2020, subject to review by the city attorney. Five, motion that the council declares the items per the attached list as surplus and authorizes the purchasing agent to dispose of same. Items determined to have value will be listed for sale on the auction website, www.publicsurplus.com. Six, motion to approve a budget transfer to fund the purchase of concrete and related materials for staff to install sidewalks and curbs. This is a transfer of $25,000 from the sidewalks, materials and supplies line. From the sidewalks and purchase services line to the sidewalks, materials and supplies line. Seven, Motion that the council authorizes, motion that the council approves the purchasing agent's recommendation to award the request for quotations for the redesign of the City of Oneonta's website based upon best value to Revise LLC, that is of Revise Software Systems of Troy, Michigan, in the amount of $14,700. 8, motion that the council approves a budget transfer to fund the redesign of the city's website and the continuing services. That would move $14,700 from the health insurance line to the shared communications and professional services line. 9, this regards the appointments to the community advisory board for the Oneonta Police Department. Chief Brenner was not able to be here tonight. He did send me a statement and he asked that I would read it, so I'd like to do so. The chief said, I wanted to express my support for the Civilian Review Board and those who have been asked to participate. I feel the selection of the named individuals is an outstanding representation of Oneonta. There are many talented and insightful people on the board, and I am excited to participate with them in the policy review. I truly feel that this is a big step forward for the City of Oneonta, the Oneonta Police Department, and all the residents and visitors. Now I'll read the motion. Motion that the council concurs with the mayor's appointment of the following persons, should say, to the Community Advisory Board for the Oneonta Police Department. John Adams Jr., representing the NAACP Oneonta chapter. Shannon McHugh as chair and representing the Commission on Community Relations and Human Rights. Luke Murphy, representing the council. Katie Botker as the city personnel director. Bryce Wooden as a citizen of Oneonta at large. Dr. Robert Compton, representing SUNY Oneonta. His position there is the chair of the Africana and Latinx department. Stacy Zuniga, representing SUNY Oneonta as a student. Bialma Charles, representing Hartford College. Her position there is the Assistant Director of Residential Life and Housing. And a student will be announced representing Hartford College, name of whom I do not have for you yet. That, I believe, concludes the consent agenda. I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. No, first I will ask for any, sorry about that. Do I have any requests to remove any of those 9 items from the consent agenda? Great. Okay, so now I will entertain a motion.
I'm sorry.
Did I miss something?
Yeah, I just had a couple questions about the website, so I'd like to remove 7 and 8, please.
You want to remove 7 and 8? Sure.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Well, any others?
I just got a quick question, and I don't want to poll it.
Well, we don't really have discussion on the consent agenda, so you may have to pull it.
All right, then can you pull number 9, please?
Sure. Okay, if there are no others, now I'll entertain a motion to pass the consent agenda, less motion 7, 8, and 9. I have a motion to approve it by Councilmember Risberger. Do I have a second? Councilmember Drenick. I will call the vote. Councilmember Murphy.
Aye.
Councilmember Davies.
Aye.
Councilmember Risberger.
Aye.
Councilmember Lepari Shu.
Aye.
Councilmember Carson.
Aye.
Councilmember Harrington.
Aye.
Councilmember Rafter.
Aye.
Councilmember Drenick.
Aye.
Okay, consent agenda minus items 7, 8, and 9 passes. Let's go now to those motions. Motion 7 had to do with the redesign of the website and awarding the project to Revise LLC of Troy, Michigan. I'll entertain a motion to approve. Councilmember Murphy, I think I have a second by Councilmember Davies. Discussion.
Yeah, so I apologize that I wasn't able to make it to planning and finance this week. My question is about the location of the companies in Troy, Michigan. I'm just wondering if any local companies were considered for potentially redesigning our website, and if
Yeah.
so, why weren't they chosen, and et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah.
just some info on that would be great.
Sure. I'm going to turn that over to Katie. Katie, are you here?
I am.
Hi, Katie.
Hi. I think it would probably make better sense to yield the floor to Carrie Harrington because she kind of chaired the
Okay.
effort and would probably be able to speak with greater authority on this subject. Carrie, if you don't mind.
Not a problem. So we did entertain a second quote from a local company, and after a detailed review by myself and 2 other city employees, along with a lot of other input, it really came down to the service that they were able to provide, the thoroughness of the quotation, and the value that we were able to get for the product we're going to receive. We took a hard look. We really did try. It is important to go with a local company. It's best to support local when we can. Unfortunately, they just weren't the right fit for the project this time.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
I sent it out prior. I don't know if you got it. Maybe it got caught up somewhere. I have a probably page and a half rationale that we wrote, indicating why we chose the company, and I can forward that to you for review if you'd like.
yeah, that would be great. You know, I just, yeah, obviously that's a question that's on everybody's mind these days. And I think the other thing is too, you know, this website redesign, we just want to make sure that we do it right. And I know that, you know, so I just wanted to ask that question before we go too far.
Absolutely. Yeah, the locally based company is one that we tried very hard, and unfortunately after a review, it just wasn't the right fit for this particular project.
Okay. And so if I can ask, was it their capabilities? Like, were they not able to meet the same specs as the company in Troy?
So part of it came down to the amount of years of experience. This particular company has worked with more than 1,400 governments. They provided a very detailed 60-something page quotation. Their responsive web design, 100% server and content management server, uptime. The alternate vendor, they did promise the same level of service. However, they weren't able to provide us with information to justify that. This particular company has a large server, quick server, a lot of memory, and more bandwidth than we could ever use. They also have a large amount of software that is included in the cost. So that was something to consider. Unfortunately, alternate company indicated more than once that, well, this might be included, but we may charge you extra. So unfortunately, it just wasn't thorough or detailed enough to provide us the information we needed.
Gotcha. Well, I think that's good feedback for that local company. And so this is maybe really under motion 8, but that 14.7, could you talk a little bit about what that entails?
Yep, so the $14,700 is the base price. That includes the redesign, the server, the hosting. It also provides our first year of maintenance. We will have, it's a 5-year agreement. We'll have 4 additional years of maintenance at $3,400, so $13,600 if my math is correct. We're looking at a 5-year all-in price of $28,000, and the cost difference between the 2 companies was really about $2,200.
Wow. Okay. Okay, I think my questions are answered. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Any other questions? Any further discussion on it at all? Okay, then I will call the vote. This is for motion 7. I have two computers here and I always pick up the wrong mouse. Okay. Councilmember Murphy,
Aye.
Councilmember Davies,
Aye.
Councilmember Risberger,
Aye.
Councilmember Lepari Shu,
Aye.
Councilmember Carson,
Yes.
Councilmember Harrington,
Yes.
Councilmember Rafter,
Aye.
Councilmember Drenick.
Aye.
Okay, that motion passes. Thank you very much. We're now going to go to motion 8. Do I have somebody who wants to move that? Councilmember Lepari Shu, do I have a second? Councilmember Harrington. Discussion? Okay, looks like the discussion was already satisfied with the last discussion. Then if there's no discussion, I'll call the vote. Councilmember Murphy,
Aye.
Councilmember Davies,
Aye.
Councilmember Risberger,
Aye.
Councilmember Lepari Shu,
Aye.
Councilmember Carson,
Yes.
Councilmember Harrington,
Aye.
Councilmember Rafter,
Yes.
Councilmember Drenick.
Aye.
Okay, number 8 passes. Thank you very much. And now we go to motion 9. This is the motion regarding appointment of appointments to the Community Advisory Board for the Oneonta Police. I'll entertain a motion to approve. Councilmember Davies, do I have a second? Councilmember Drenick, discussion.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. With the exception of the college students, but even though they live here for their college time, everybody on this list is a city resident, correct?
To my knowledge, Scott, however, I cannot attest to the residence of the 2 staff faculty representatives of the university. I asked the presidents to nominate who they thought would be the strongest, most appropriate faculty or staff members. These nominations came from them. I did not stipulate that they had to be residents of the city. They may be, I just don't know. The key thing is that they're representing the institution of Hartwick College or SUNY Oneonta.
Okay, thanks.
Any further discussion? Okay, I'll call the vote. I'm sorry, Councilmember Carson?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say thank you for getting Bryce Wooden on the committee. He's a good young man. I remember him in Pee Wee football 1,000 years ago. Oh, wait, he's still young. So it was 1,000 years ago for me, but Bryce is a good young man, and I'm glad to see he's becoming a strong community member.
Thank you for saying that. I'll tell you a little story. I think everybody knows that, Bryce spoke at the protest in Cooperstown about a very traumatic experience that he and his family had 20 years ago. It was a case of mistaken identity, and the police, it was actually the troopers, it was not the Oneonta police, were looking for a drug dealer, and for whatever reason, it was mistaken identity, and they came into the house and held his family at gunpoint for a significant amount of time. Bryce in his talk said he understood that and was not questioning the mistaken identity. What has bothered him for 20 years is that the police never apologized to his family for the mistake. When I was told that, I called Bryce, and I told him this may not mean much 20 years later, but for whatever it's worth, as the mayor of the city, on behalf of the people, I want to apologize to your family for what they went through. And Bryce was extremely appreciative. And he said to me, he says, I love Oneonta. I love living here. He said, and I'm at a point in my life now where if there's an opportunity, I'd like to give back to the community. And I took him up on it. So I called him up and said, I remember you said that. And he was honored to be asked.
Well, that's good. He's got a really good mom and dad too. I know them both, and it's unfortunate that incident happened. But yeah, he's got great parents and great family around him. Good to see him joining the community.
100% agree. Okay. Am I mute? I'm not muted. If there's no further discussion on that, I'll call the vote. Councilmember Murphy?
Aye.
Councilmember Davies?
Yes.
Councilmember Risberger?
Aye.
Councilmember Lepari Shu?
Aye.
Councilmember Carson?
Aye.
Councilmember Harrington?
Yes.
Councilmember Rafter?
Yes.
Councilmember Drenick?
Aye.
That motion passes. Thank you very much. Okay. Now we've got an individual motion. The committee wanted to leave it off the consent agenda. This is a motion that the council approves extending the requirements for reserving space in the Muller Plaza, Main Street Walkway, and Water Street Plaza to the Westcott Lot fence area. I believe the process application form was modified from the current locations, and I believe you have copies of that. Do I have a motion to approve? Councilmember Risberger. I think I have a second from Councilmember Murphy. Discussion. If there is none, I will call the vote. Councilmember Murphy.
Aye.
Councilmember Davies.
Aye.
Councilmember Risberger.
Aye.
Councilmember Lepari Shu.
Aye.
Councilmember Carson.
Aye.
Councilmember Harrington.
Yes.
Councilmember Rafter.
Yes.
Councilmember Drenick.
Aye.
Okay, that motion passes. Thank you. And now we have a discussion on the Glenwood Creek. Oh, I just lost my screen here. The Glenwood Creek Culvert Project. I want to say a few words on that first. If I can get my screen to work here. I'm more concerned about process than I am the project. There's many reasons why this is a good project. It was a difficult decision to make because it's a need that's not now, it's a need in the future, and we have to justify it against current needs. Actually, this was a difficult decision to make before COVID. After COVID, perhaps it's more difficult, perhaps it's easier, and that just depends on the way you look at it. Being successful at creating a city government budget is not that different from creating a home budget. If you can't afford everything you need or everything you want, you have to set priorities. If you can't afford everything you need, you don't have to set priorities. You can just buy it all. And it's whether you're at home or whether in government, it's the same thing. In the last few years, I have been a bit troubled because we got into a process of first come, first serve. Our council was being presented, and this predates this council. Council was being presented with projects one at a time instead of in context. As a result, every time you buy something, it means there's probably something else you can't buy. And that wasn't being able to be considered. You would just look at a project in isolation, and if it was a good project, it would likely pass. And I was not comfortable with that. And I wanted to make sure that we move beyond that and not look at things in isolation, particularly now as our budget is becoming more challenging due to COVID situation. For that reason, I had sent an email asking Ginny to provide the council with a list of planned and potential capital projects with their funding sources through 2022, and I thank her for providing that, Ginny. I took a look at the list, a couple of comments on it. If my numbers are approximately correct, it looks like projects that have not yet begun, but which are planned or potential, will require city funding of approximately $15 million, either through the use of existing city funds or borrowing. I'm talking through 2022. I did notice that there was no explanation, but the Belmont Hudson road repairs rebuild was in the improvement plan that was approved by the council was scheduled for 2022. I noticed in the new document that Ginny sent out, it's now scheduled for 2025. Similarly, West Broadway in the capital improvement plan that was approved by the council was scheduled for 2022. And now in the document that was sent out, it was pushed back to 2024. Also, I noticed that that there was facility upgrade borrowing in 2022 of $2.2 million in the capital improvement plan, but I didn't see it on Ginny's list. I don't know what happened to that. And there was parks improvement borrowing on the approved capital improvement plan of 1.5 million. And that wasn't on Ginny's list. So I'm not sure what happened to that. But more importantly, Ginny did send out a very strong plea and justification for approval of this project. And honestly, not a criticism of the project, but I was a little troubled by that, Ginny, I have to say, because it went back to looking at projects in isolation, justifying this project because it's a good project, as opposed to looking at it in terms of, can we afford everything we need? If we can, great, let's do them all. So if not, then I think it's the council's job to prioritize and determine, of course, with the staff's recommendations, which projects. So, if we are confident, Jenny, that we can afford to spend or borrow the nearly $20 million at the new projects that have been or are now planned through 2022, then great, let's just do it. On the other hand, if in the current state we're not confident, or confidence cannot be stated that the councils that we are certain that we can afford nearly $20 million in spending or borrowing in the project through 2022, then it falls to the council's role to prioritize the scheduling, both the scheduling and the funding of these projects. Of course, again, based upon staff's recommendations. Now, it's a bit of an overwhelming decision. There's so much information. Projects are so involved. A lot of them are new to people. And again, if Ginny tells us we can afford them all, no problem, great. We just move forward. If not, I have a couple of thoughts. Would we want to incorporate this into the budget discussion that's tomorrow night instead of now, because it is part of the ongoing budget? Or another thought is that as we speak, federal Congress is debating the next stimulus act. One of the items that's being debated is federal assistance to local governments. We don't know how that's going to play out. We should have an answer on that, hopefully this week, because Congress is due to go on vacation soon. do we want to hold this until we get the word on the federal assistance, which could be as tomorrow or this week? I'm sure that DOT is not going to give us a hard time on that, given the current circumstances. And take that into consideration, because, you know, if we receive that federal assistance, that overcomes some of the crunch that we may be feeling as a result of the lack of revenue from COVID. So just two ideas that I'm throwing out there. With that, I will turn it over to Ginny and Greg.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. The new schedule, to answer some of your first questions, the Belmont and Hudson Street, and Greg can reiterate this. He was thinking of being able to postpone it because he would do it in sections with the DPW staff. Is that the correct approach, Greg, that you wanted to be there on both West Broadway and Belmont?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing with the capital plan is, you know, Belmont and Hudson, that project was being pushed by one former council member strongly. I mean, not that the other council members wouldn't have supported it, but there was never any discussion and a decision about that particular project as to where it would fall on the capital plan or what the scope would be. The capital plan is something that I primarily develop in conjunction with the city manager, and we presented that as part of the budget process. The council approved it as a whole, but there really wasn't much discussion about any particular project on that list. Obviously, some of these have had a lot of discussion when you look at the transit hub, those sorts of things that have gone through a extensive planning process already. But a lot of these street improvement projects are things that are, you know, filtered through the engineering department. As you know, looking at our streets as a whole, it's a complex process to determine when things are done. It's not necessarily just the worst looking street or the worst street to drive down isn't necessarily the top priority. You know, when you have a bigger project like Belmont and Hudson, where the sub base, the full pavement needs to be reconstructed, it needs curbs, there should ought to be sidewalk extended where it isn't now. It needs a stormwater system that's not there. All of that adds up to a bigger project like the number you see there. Something like that, it can be, as Jenny alluded to, phased over time. And when you do that, you know, it might give us an opportunity to do some of that work in-house with DPW forces, but as you know, our DPW is limited in what they can do as far as construction projects. We couldn't do a $1.5 million project all ourselves, but if we broke it out over phases, there's parts of that we can do. But of course, any project we do in-house, it's taking, you know, we have to prioritize. It takes us away from something else. So that's something that I'm trying to work on, spreading out our DPW labor appropriately, you know, including that $1.48 million project on the 5-year capital plan, as well as the other ones, the West Broadway, even the water system improvements that hasn't had any detailed discussion at the council level or committee level. Those are things that we're kind of looking at in the future. And I would welcome more discussion on individual projects and their merits so people understand better and you're more informed in the capital plan approval process as part of the budget. But I will say that there's a lot of these projects that haven't been discussed at this point. And, you know, I think that it's a good point that we need to talk more about these things and understand the full big picture. That said, with something like Glenwood Creek, I will say that, you know, I'm not going to recommend a project that's not a priority of some sort. Like, yes, Glenwood Creek culvert, you know, hasn't collapsed yet. It hasn't fallen in or anything, but there are some red flags there. There are some issues in engineering terms. It's beyond its useful life. Granted, we don't want to wait for it to fully fail, and we can't say exactly how long that will last. It could be another 5, 10, 20 years, but it has overtopped. There are some concerns with it, which we've gone through in detail with the finance committee. And when you have an opportunity like a state grant, like we have now, $690,000, a significant portion of the project, you know, we have more priorities, more projects, even on this list, even that are on this list that we'd like to do that really ought to be done. Like everywhere else in America, we're well behind on our infrastructure maintenance. There's a lot of assets that are beyond their useful life. When you have an opportunity to take advantage of grant funding, spread out that cost and reduce the impact on the taxpayers, I think that's, you know, that does factor into the prioritization of the project. I certainly don't think it would be a poor investment. I think it would be a good investment to go forward with the project and do it now, as long as the city can financially handle that at this time. Like, I understand there's concerns about our revenue. And then at this point, I guess I'll give it back over to Ginny to talk about that a little bit. I think she has expressed that she would be comfortable with the investment from a financial perspective. And I can answer any questions, after maybe Ginny has a chance to.
Yeah. Jenny, yeah, if you could just talk about that, because, obviously we can afford to do this project. It's not that expensive, it's not the biggest project we've ever done. The question is, can we afford to do everything on the list?
No, Mayor, we cannot afford to do, on the list, it totals $55 million. We cannot afford it in the sense that we will be able to do every project at that dollar. But what we're trying to do on the schedule is to show the potential of the repairs that we've got in front of us. And when we look at the grant funds versus the city funds, and also the separations between the general water and sewer funds. So when you take that 55 million and you apply the grants to it, and then you apply what's going to affect the general fund, that 55 million then turns into 7 million. And I'm working with physical advisors to be able to get a schedule if we were to bond $3.5 million in 3 years, and then $3.5 million in the next 3 years later, to see how that would affect our debt payments. I don't have that information yet. They're going to be getting it to me soon, and I'll be presenting it to the council for consideration. With the water and sewer, Greg and I have been looking at the water and sewer rents and anticipating that we would have about $6 to $7 million in water and about the $8 million in sewer. And we've got a plan for over the next 5 years to fund those debt payments. So that 55 million really comes down to the 7 million for the general fund. And currently, the reason I wrote such a supportive email for it, and I apologize to you, Mayor, for if the approach wasn't acceptable. The reason I said that is because we had $690,000 of grant given to us, so that the city taxpayer will make 2/3 of their investment back from the grant. And mind you, I understand that when we approve a grant application, in the grant application, our design and our not only our design process, but our scope of work and all of those type of preparation costs are funded by the grant. So we need to take that opportunity. But in applying for having like a shovel-ready grant, like Scott was asking me about, that's not possible because there's so many unknowns when we take the grant application. And it was presented to us that this project would be fully funded by the grant. We weren't expecting it to go over the amount that was approved. So when council approved this grant, I want to say it was back in 18 maybe, and at that time we thought it was going to be fully funded. And then when the state got looking at it in stronger detail, they realized how complicated the culvert was. And they have told us that if they had known how complicated this culvert was, they probably would never approve the grant. So the reason that I'm trying to support it so strongly is that I don't think we'll get this opportunity again for this particular project. So that's why I said, let's look into the future as far as if we don't utilize the project, the grant monies we have now, what will happen in the future when we actually have to fund this project in whole. We may not have the grant opportunity at that time, if it's 5 or 10 years down the road, depending on when it becomes urgent to actually fund it. So when I get the debt schedules from physical advisors as far as potential payments and timing of those payments, then I can offer that information to the council. I believe it is in 2023 that the general fund's debt payments are going to decrease to close to $200,000 a year. Right now, the general fund's debt amount is about $667,000 a year. 2023, that's going to go down by the 190. I think it's about 196. So that's when I'm looking for having to fund potential general fund projects to start another payment to begin in 2023 to keep that debt payment level to what it is today. And then it will, yes, Luke.
I'm sorry, Ginny. Why is it? I'm sorry, I'm stuttering too. What caused such a large drop in the debt payment starting in 2023?
Because a couple of issues will be fully paid for. And that's what we spread them out over time. And by able to spread the cost of a project over a 20-year period, not only are you benefiting the current community, but you're also going to benefit the future community for the benefits of having that very costly project done that should last 20 to 40 years. And then you're able to take that debt payment and spread it over a larger population. So as far as the general fund itself, if we need to bond $7 million, I want to time it in such a way that that payment is spread over a timely manner as far as when our debt payments start to change. And on top of that, when we're not going to actually know what the project is going to cost until we get through the bidding process. So the estimates that we have right now, they're obviously going to change depending on the time, depending on the actuals when they come in. But so these are just, it's kind of a roadmap of what we need to do in the future to give us a plan, figure out which priorities we need to have. I'm going to age myself here a little bit, but streets never cost this much years ago to repair. Now, when you repair a street, it's over $1 million when it used to be $300,000 to $400,000 to repair a whole street. So when the infrastructure keeps getting delayed, they just keep getting more crowded as the future comes. So we just need to look at the projects, figure out the timing of when they should be done, and find out the best funding sources for them. It is always the council's decision, and I respect the council's decision of how they want to plan the projects. It's ultimately your choice. But I just want to stress that if you do return this grant, then we may not have the opportunity to get it again in the future when this project will come back to us in the future. That is my biggest concern. I just don't want to lose the $690,000. And I understand between the COVID and all of the other projects on the list that we need to prioritize them. But however, this one just gets a 2/3 return to the taxpayer. And as far as the other changes, Mayor, as far as what was approved in last year's capital project, when Greg and Judy were going over the funding, because of different grant opportunities that came or different ways to fund the project, it shifted the monies. And we can go over that in detail, project by project, if you would like.
I'll open up to council comments, questions. Councilmember Carson.
Thank you, Mayor. As chair of the Finance Committee, I want to thank the committee because we had such good in-depth conversation about this particular project. It brought to light that we were looking at projects individually. We weren't looking at the big picture of what is all of the projects, what is the prioritization from Greg, our engineer. So that's when Greg has shared with us and Ginny shared with us this week this capital projects, and that's our big picture with the big ticket items. So I wanted to thank the committee for putting that in front of us. And the reason why we moved it forward to the council without it laid out as a motion is because it was really the contents of our conversation was based on how are we going to pay for it. I don't think anybody was really honed in on whether it was a good investment or not, or whether Greg brought a project up to us that didn't need to be done. That was well explained. It's an infrastructure. It's a main artery in the city. You've seen the pictures. You now know that it's involved. As Councilmember Murphy would find out, if that area was to block up, he would have angry residents because there would be tractor trailers that would be being pushed through the residential streets. So I think it's good for us to be proactive in this infrastructure. I believe Gary mentioned it, or Jenny, or Greg, or maybe all of the above. you know, we're obtaining a $690,000 grant, and we're coming up with 370,000. I think that for us as a committee, and committee members, please correct me if I'm wrong, was our main discussion was how we're going to pay for it. And so that's why we wanted to bring it up to full council, because some of the committee felt if this project was so important, then let's reallocate money from other projects and just pay for it with city taxpayers. You know, the 370, don't keep bonding everything, keep pushing, you know, our debt down the road. And so we wanted to hear as a committee, the other council members and your thoughts on how do you want to approach that. And I think Gary has alluded to that also, as you look at that capital projects schedule, how do you really want to pay for this moving forward for the next 5 years?
Councilmember Harrington.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This has been, like Councilmember Carson said, has been discussed. And you know, my thing is caution on grants. You know, you got to make sure in the back of your mind as we do things that we know where we can get the money if we have to contribute to the grant, because it's nice to take money, but then when you start putting money in on top of it, it's just, you got to be careful, because it can be a double-edged sword, so to speak. You know, nothing's free. Grant money's not free. It still comes from taxpayers. It's just a bigger source of taxpayers. And when we're starting to talk about bonding other projects like the parking garage and things like that, I'm going to disagree with Jenny. On the county board, when I was on there, we would put, before we put in grants, we'd make sure, A, we knew how we were going to fund it. B, how quick could we get it shovel ready? All that stuff can still be done in a municipality. And to say you can't, you're not looking at the big picture. And each individual puzzle piece on its own merit looks important. Then when you start looking at the whole puzzle, you're starting to find out, well, if I don't have the border piece, I can't contain the inside of the puzzle. And I'm going to agree with Len. I think being a major artery, and Luke, I don't know if you were there when the floods, when the water came ripping over that road up through there. I think it's a well worthwhile project to do. And I jumped down in that creek the other day and was walking it. And I was afraid I wasn't going to get back out. I'll just be honest with you. But it's, when you see it up close and you really look at it, you know, there's concerns. And until I saw it firsthand, I was like, you know, because it's hard to judge, it could go 20 years, 30 years, or it could go. And so, Greg, thanks for including the pictures. I appreciate that to everybody else, because unless you really get down in there, you don't really see where it's been, you know, cut in and cut under. But I just, you know, this is it's a hard thing because of everything we're going through. And if in the back of my mind is what happens if we get shut down again and we're scrambling, what's the, you know, because I haven't seen how we're going to be putting monies back in the reserves yet, where we keep taking money out of them. Eventually we're going to run out of money if we just keep taking out of reserves or not put money back in. And if we do get shut down again with the COVID, what we're going through, we might have to bond just to keep the city going eventually at some point. So there's just a lot of caution, you know, and that's all I was really trying to get out there as we move forward is we got to proceed with caution and make sure that we always have the big picture in front of us.
May I respond to that, Mayor?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, of course, Jenny.
Yeah, I just want to inform you on bonding to keep the doors open. You're only allowed to bond for a type of piece of equipment that has at least a 10-year life. We're not, as a municipality, allowed to borrow money just to pay for salaries. That we cannot do. So I just want to put that out there. And then also, just to give you history on how we have built our reserves, there is a process in taxation where you can actually include it in your tax levy to build your reserves. The city has never done that. How we have built our reserves over the years is because we are conservative in both of our revenue and expenditure budgets. And when we realize surpluses, that is when we take that money and we put it in the reserves. So all of the reserves that we have currently, which is about, I want to say roughly about $7 million, it's because of all of the conservative budgets that have been made before us. And for example, last year in 2019, I think it was in November, December, council approved to put in $1 million into our various reserves. And it was because we had funds available. So that's how we build up our reserve, Scott. We're conservative on our revenue estimates and we're conservative on our expenditures. And when our budget realizes a surplus, for example, unfortunately for the police department, they haven't had full staffing, but those positions are expensive. So when those positions are vacant, the city realizes a savings. Those things add up. If there's another vacancy in another department, those numbers add up. Because even though somebody's at a $50,000 salary, their actual cost is closer to $85,000 when you add fringe benefits onto it. So it's with those mechanisms, when we have savings because an expense is not incurred, or we have a windfall of revenues, that's how we build up our reserves.
I think Councilmember Murphy had his hand up.
I did, yes. And just speaking to this project, I was not here in 2006. Well, I'm not going to tell you how young I was, but I was a little bit younger. I did, however, see what happens when infrastructure fails in 2011. My hometown of Schenectady was severely impacted. Many homes were not destroyed, but very severely damaged. And it was like looking at the aftermath of Katrina in some instances. Part of the city was flooded. Given today of all days for us to discuss this, when we have about 3 inches of rain hitting, it really hits home that how quickly a flood could really damage and devastate the community, particularly the East End by the culvert. Also thinking long term, 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the line, predictions are quite bleak. Storms like this are going to become much more common, and we need to be prepared for that. As Ginny has alluded to, not only from a financial standpoint, in which we've got quite a bit of support from the state, but also just we really need to be preparing. And infrastructure is something that, like Greg mentioned, is really an American problem. And as we go on in time, pushing it down the road, I understand it's an expense that we may have to look other places to take care of, but I think it's one that is justifiable.
I thought I saw Councilmember Risberger's hand up. Yeah.
Unmute myself here. So this is obviously a tough decision here. Jenny, thank you for giving us all the information on the project. I'm concerned that we have this grant that's going to pay for the majority of the project. We can't guarantee that we're going to receive this again. We know that this project has to go forward at some point. And this is a project that I would much rather plan for the work that's got to be done and the adjustment of traffic patterns around it when we plan ahead rather than in an emergency. That will also increase the cost of the project, and we may find ourselves, in 5 years doing this project full cost without any kind of grant funding for it. I realize we have a lot of other projects we have to do within town. But I think the state looks at our bond rating is really good right now. And I'm afraid that if we give this grant back, the way that it's going to make us look to the state saying, well, they're in decent financial shape and they're refusing to take on this grant to do this project. Makes me concerned what they are going to think of us in the future for any other grants that we may apply for. And I remember the time where we were not receiving grants. I wouldn't want to go back to that. So, I mean, Scott, I understand what you mean about there's a double edge to grant process, to receiving grants. But I also know the city's come a long ways from going after the grants and then trying to match it up with a project. We're now looking at projects and looking to see what funding is out there to take care of these projects that have to be done. So I would, for me, I would push to try to get this done while we have the funding right now.
Anybody else? Okay. My sense is that I think we have a majority consensus to go forward with this project. Does anybody feel otherwise? Anybody object to that? Okay. Greg, what if Len, was that you raising your hand?
It was, Gary. So I don't get all the council members in on my iPad. So we do have a consensus. So Greg needed this, needed the consensus to relay to New York State Department of Transportation tomorrow. So that's the reason why we had it put in for discussion. So obviously following the chain, a process, it'll go back to finance, but at least now Greg can communicate to New York State DOT that we're going to accept the grant.
Do we need a formal motion on this?
I don't think so. The city council in January passed a motion to enter the state local agreement with New York State DOT to proceed with the project, with the understanding that we'd have this conversation now and give ourselves an opportunity to hit the brakes. But to continue, I don't think we need a motion. Jenny about, so I think we'll probably wait until we have an actual bid number for the construction to know what the amount over the grant is going to be to set up a budget for that money. But Jenny, do you want to talk about that? That doesn't need to be done tonight.
Correct. Yes, I agree with Greg. The motion to create the capital project doesn't need to be done tonight because we do need to wait for the bidding processes to be complete and we can have final numbers. And once that happens, we'll bring back a motion to create the capital project and to adopt the budget at that time.
So I will just ask, are there any objections to just continuing to move forward with this? I don't think I'm hearing any.
No,
So,
Mr. Mayor, the only question would be, at one point Greg said we had to notify landowners. So would that also go underneath this to let them know that we are going to start moving forward with this?
Yeah, public outreach and outreach to those adjoining landowners will be part of the process. DOT is administering the project on our behalf, essentially with their consultant. So part of that process is right-of-way acquisition. In this case, it's temporary construction easements, maybe a permanent easement on either end of the culvert for access for maintenance. And that's all part of that process. And they've also already been contacted initially when we did some soil borings. We explained what was going on, so that they should be aware of that the city's looking at this project, and they'll definitely be kept in the loop as we go forward.
Thanks.
Councilmember Drenick?
The only caveat that I would have is that I really do want to have a review of these major projects in context, and I'd like to think that we might be able to get that scheduled relatively soon.
And that's, yes, and that's part of the budget process, creating a capital improvement plan. We usually do a 5-year plan as a required part of the budget process to be approved by council. And as we move into the budget process starting tomorrow night. I think it's important for council to recognize that one of the areas that you have the greatest impact is on the capital improvement plan. You know, most of the, you know, probably 3/4, 80% of our budget, there's very little you can do about. It's set salaries by union contracts and benefits and so on. But the areas where there's a lot of money that you really have an impact is in the capital improvement plan. So probably something that we should spend more time on discussing in the council, making certain priorities than we have in the last few years. Good discussion. I think, you know, for me, I was having discussion about the broader picture as Mark Drenick just said was the important part. Okay, with that, the one other thing that we have on the agenda was continuing a discussion about last week, we received a 30-day advance notice for an application for a liquor license by the Pale Horse. Once again, to just reiterate the process, somebody applies for a liquor license, the municipality has an opportunity to comment on it. However, the State Liquor Authority allows us to waive our opportunity to comment on it. We're given 30 days to comment on it. The State Liquor Authority says if the municipality wants to waive your comment period on it, you can waive your comment period on it, and that allows the applicant to get their license a little quicker. In all the time I've been here, we've always waived it because it was always pretty straightforward. People, you know, were applying to do something that we understood. I had questioned whether the council wants to waive their ability to respond because the application was so incomplete and it was very difficult to understand exactly what was being requested. They were requesting to serve alcohol outside adjacent to a public walkway. There was no discussion about that. There was no diagrams of how close to the public walkway. There was no discussion about sound barriers because visitors at the Clarion Hotel would be in very, very close proximity to where they're serving alcohol. They were asking approval on their application for hard liquor as well as beer and wine. Our code does not permit hard liquor outdoors. So there were a number of questions that it seemed like there wasn't enough information for us to just waive our right to comment. It turns out that on July 30th, we were notified by the State Liquor Authority that the application could not be considered as the application was so incomplete and very key requirements were not adequately demonstrated. The letter stated that the applicants had until August 3rd, which was yesterday, to submit a whole list of key documents and requirements and proofs. Whether they did or not, I don't know. So I don't know the status. I don't know if this application is changed. I don't know if the documents have been submitted. I don't know if the application is not going forward. So I think given that, it would be inappropriate to waive our comment period because we don't even know what is being applied for or if it is being applied for at this time. We'll get some more information as we go forward. Any questions or concerns with that? Yes, sir. Councilmember LaParche.
So is the Pale Horse, do they have a license to sell alcohol at this time?
That is a good question. I don't believe they do. They applied 3 times. This is the 3rd application. Wasn't clear to me what happened with the previous 2 applications. It is not my understanding that they do. Kerry or David may be able to contradict me on that. I'm not sure.
Can I just throw in here? I think they did get like an event license a couple times, which is why they had a couple like select events, like a couple weekends where they were able to sell beer and wine. But as far as I understand it, they don't have a full-on, any sort of full-on license. That they had limited, weekends where they could have, events at the site.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else have any concerns about this? We'll find out the status of their application. My sense was that the deficiencies in the application were quite, I shouldn't say serious, but significant. So I don't know if they were able to meet them. Councilmember Murphy, was your hand up?
It was just a quick clarifying question, if you don't mind. So after we vote tonight, this will be essentially our comment period. So then it will go. No.
No, there's no vote involved. What happens is if anybody objects to waiving the comment period, we don't waive it because that individual is free to may want to comment. The comment doesn't have to come from me. Doesn't have to come, or it can come. So if you want to make a comment, you would say, I don't want to waive the city's ability to comment. So if anybody objected. So if it was unanimous that we want to waive our ability to comment on it, then we would just waive it. But I'm not even sure what application we're waiving now, or if there is a current application. Yes, Mark Janik.
So outside of their application to the State Liquor Authority, which I frankly am not clear on either, I will connect with the proprietors in the next couple of days and get as much information as I can. So and I'll share that with council so that hopefully that will at least answer some questions.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, that would be perfect. That would be great if you could do that. Anybody else? David, you're lit up there. Did you have something you want to say?
Usually the 30-day comment period does not commence until the application is deemed complete by the SLA, and we can do it. Sometimes we'll do it on renewals without it, but normally our 30-day period doesn't even commence until the SLA deems the application complete. So I think we're well within our. I don't think there's a clock running at all at this point. That's what I was trying to express.
Okay, I think that concludes that issue. Correspondence. I'm not aware of any correspondence. Open it up for additional items. Len, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. The first one I wanted to bring up to the council and see if it can go before the legislative committee was within our city charter, our committee members, board members, individuals that volunteer to be on these that you as the mayor put before the council that we ultimately approve. We don't have the mechanism to go beyond three-year terms. Is that correct? And if so, we have some community members that would like to, volunteer past that. And I was just wondering if maybe the legislative committee could take a look at this issue and see if maybe there's a way that we could maybe extend these community members to be able to keep serving. Because I'm sure, Gary, you're going to be the first one to tell me that it's not easy finding folks to volunteer their time to be on city committees.
Yeah, I'll let Dave Risberger talk about it because when he was on the, this was a change that was made by the Charter Commission when they changed the charter. We didn't have term limits, and it was the commission that recommended that change to add term limits. So I don't know what the justification was, but Dave, you may want to talk about it.
Well, I could give some of the justification. Parks and Rec was one pure example where we had people that were on that board for 20 years. And there were a lot of instances where people wanted to get on boards or commissions and there was no seat available to them. People would stay forever. So we installed the 3-term limit, and then you have to step away from that seat for a year. And then if another opening comes up on that board, you can ask the mayor to appoint you. Or if there's another board or commission, you're certainly available to or allowed to apply for those. So just because you hit your 3-term limit doesn't mean you're not allowed to be on a board or commission ever again, or even that exact same board or commission again. It's just to allow some other new blood to get on the boards. So, but I do remember Parks and Rec was the prime example at the time of people that were on there for a very, very, very long time.
But we could take it to the legislative committee for discussion if that's what you'd like to happen.
I think it would be great to have the discussion in that committee. It's just, to be honest with you, David, I know when I was on the airport committee, we struggled to get people to be on the committee.
Well, airport's a very unique board, though. I'm sure you would agree.
Right.
Okay, well, we'll put it on the legislative committee.
Yeah. Okay, great.
And, term limits is always an interesting issue because if you have really good people on a board, you hate term limits. If you have people you want to get rid of, you love term limits.
Exactly. The other item that I wanted to bring up to the council is with regards to the airport. We actually have someone that has been interested. They approached us last fall. They're still very interested in leasing a small portion of the airport proper to build a very expensive hangar. This is the first time someone's approached the airport commission or the city to do such a thing. And it's been in operation since 1965. So I just kind of wanted to get I'll answer any questions anybody has, but I just kind of wanted to get a sense of if there was anybody that maybe didn't want to move forward, because we're at the point now where our city attorney, Dave Merzik, has drafted a lease, but we wanted to, under the guidance of the mayor, wanted to get the council's kind of a straw poll if there was any major objections to maybe moving this project forward. Luke?
Not an objection, just a question, if I may.
Sure.
The individual leasing the property of the airport, would that in any way compromise the amount of traffic that would be able to come through, or however much space other folks are using? I'm not exactly sure of how much space is being used versus what is required. Just curious if that would take away from the larger users of the airport.
The short answer would be no. This individual is one of those main users now. He absolutely loves the Oneonta Airport, and he would like to personally invest into it. It's a substantial investment that we're talking about.
Great.
David?
Yeah, I think I know the individual. I think we've had a conversation in the past about this person. So the only question I have, Len, is how is this going to impact the plan of the airport at this point, the overall building plan at the airport? Is it going to have any impact at all, or is that taken into account? Are we going to have to adjust?
No adjustments for the 20-year plan. Absolutely not. It has no negative effect. In fact, it's part of our plan was to start creating space where folks that want to make an investment could start making an investment.
So it won't have any impact on runway? Okay.
No, the runway and the taxiway, no negative effect to it whatsoever.
Okay.
Thanks,
So,
Len.
I guess question between Len and David Merzik. Is there any downside to this?
You want me to respond to that?
Only if you want to.
Well, the answer is that just so you know where I come from, it's always my I always like the city to acquire property and never to get rid of property. So if we give a long-term lease to someone who's doing essentially a private development on the airport, then that limits, just as the mayor was talking earlier about, if you pay for one project, you can't do another, by essentially privatizing a portion of the airport. It then limits what we can do now or in the future with that space and that location. We'll get rental income, and that's a good thing. And if that's the goal, then it's fine. But it's going to be a private facility, essentially on public property. And once it's there, it's going to be there presumably for quite a long time. He's not going to invest. He's talking about building a hangar, and that's not something that you do with the intention of doing it short term. So that's the only problem that I have with it. And again, that's a council determination. It's not a factual thing.
Yeah, and Len, the other side of that would be, could you talk about how you see it's in the city's benefit to go forward with it?
Sure, it's definitely in the benefit of the city. We're always talking about economic development. The airport currently has, I believe it's something like 400 and some odd acres of a land. There's at least 50 to 60 acres that could be developed just purely for economic growth. So this particular hangar will take up a very small space. I believe it was 80 by 100. So it was an 8,000 square foot facility. So it's just a positive. The FAA is always looking for traffic counts. This individual will be coming back and forth into Oneonta, our community, buying fuel, bringing more folks in. We know that there's more folks just like him out there. And so we see it as an opportunity. We also look at it as no different than the city has purchased and had built 3 hangars since 1965. And those are currently full or almost full. So there is a need for hangar space. So right now, the Airport Commission, well, I shouldn't say right now, but the Airport Commission feels that this is a huge positive for the airport.
Only question I have is how do we, and David probably can answer this, can we, I'm sure we can, but how do we safeguard ourselves if this individual got hit by a truck a year from now after his building was built and he has a long-term lease to this property and no longer uses it, and this becomes a big vacant building that is owned by this individual's family, what recourse do we have by letting this thing just stay and get ugly and for the next 30 years?
That's the sort of thing that we'd address in a lease. The FAA through McFarland and Johnson has provided us with a form ground lease that's quite comprehensive. I mean, it's certainly possible that someone's estate would leave it empty for that period of time, but at the same time, they'd still have to comply with all codes, and they would be paying rent on it. So that would be. Also, there's some wiggle, some discussions that we have to have regarding the length of a lease and its renewability. On the one hand, this fella isn't going to come unless he can know that he has a significant period of time to lease it, so he can amortize it and or sell it to somebody else. The lease is assignable. At the same time, there are general restrictions for municipalities that they can't lease properties generally for more than 5 years. The theory being that that one council can't bind the hands of all future councils for the next 100 years or something like that. So we'd have to work out how that would be done. It's often done with renewals, either annual or periodic renewals, where one party or the other has to object to it. But again, we'll talk about those things. So those things are addressable once it's built. If, if somebody goes bankrupt or something, then it would come back, the property would come back to us and we would own it. Because there'd be a a default on the lease, just like any other commercial lease. We put in what things we can, but we don't always predict the future, especially 20 years out down the line.
Okay, so does anybody object? I'm sorry.
I can't see everybody, so I was just going to ask the same question.
Does anybody object to David moving forward? The reason that it was being asked was before David undertakes the work of working out the details of the lease, wanted to make sure that it was something that the council supported before committing himself to doing the work on it. Are there any objections to him moving forward?
Understand this isn't binding the council in any way. It's just that for the investor and for the city, there's going to be a lot of time and energy, and for the airport committee as well. There's going to be a lot of time, energy, and money in the workup of it. This is going to be a significant project for the fellow who's coming in, and for us. So before we went too far along, I just want to make sure that the council was aware that this was happening. So as things move on in the future, we had a sense that there was no. If everybody says no, we're not going to do that, then that would save everybody a lot of time and energy. That's all.
Does anybody feel it needs further discussion before we tell David to invest his time and energy into it?
Mayor, I have a question.
Sure, Jenny.
And does this project, does it already have FAA approval, or if not, will it need FAA approval?
The simple answer is yes.
Yes.
I mean, we can't do anything in violation of any of the operational rules and regulations, but
that's why we've already been in talk with our airport engineers, McFarland and Johnson, Jenny. So they're well aware of it, and that's the folks that gave David Merzig the lease drafts to use as guidelines. So
all right,
following all
I didn't hear
all the rules.
I didn't hear anybody say that they felt this needed further discussion. So it looks like you've got the green light to put some work into this.
Okay.
Stephen, I assume you're behind the big S there that stands for Superman. I didn't hear from you today. Were you prepared to go into executive session to talk about your thought of pending litigation, or did you want to hold off on that?
I mean, I can if we want to.
We can if you want to do it now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be quick. It's pretty self-explanatory.
Okay. All right. I'm seeing some hands go up here. So, Mark Dronick.
Yeah, Mayor, before we go into executive session, I just also want to just bring something up really quickly relative to volunteerism, how difficult it is, as Len was saying, to get volunteers. We are 3 weeks into this potentially 8-week-long every Saturday event downtown, which is doing exactly what we had hoped in our wildest dreams, that it might. Every business is having a better day than they had had. Everybody, with the exception of maybe one business, is really seeing the benefit of this. We have 11 volunteers. We have 7 staff through CDO Workforce. And our first iteration of this thing 3 weeks ago, when we got done with it, everybody went, yay. And then the second week, everyone, yay. And then the third week, it was like, okay, how many more weeks? I really do need to ask anybody here who might be able to afford an hour or an hour and a half from noon until 1:30 on a Saturday, and they might be able to sit at a safety station so that our CDO Workforce staff can assist in the farmers market breakdown, and not have those spaces go unattended. If they are inclined to volunteer that length of time, it doesn't need to be every Saturday. Any little bit of help right now would be much appreciated. We are bringing the retailers are invested in it in the morning. The restaurants are invested in the evening in the breakdown, which is an awful lot of work. We're not looking for work. We're just looking literally for a few bodies to sit at the tables so that they are manned between 12 and 1:30. Volunteers are hard to come by. We can all agree. And so I just want to put that out not only for this group, but also those folks that are watching on YouTube.
Scott Harrington.
Mr. Mayor, I'm forwarding something that came up to me from the residents on Parish Ave. They would like to have a meeting with you at, I said, do you want it by Zoom? They prefer a face-to-face, and I explained all the masks and the social distancing and stuff. What would be the best way? They want to go through me to set up the meeting. Is that something that you and I can discuss here through email, or do you want a phone call, or how would you like to go about that?
Either way, phone call, email, doesn't matter.
Okay, thanks. That's all I got. Thanks.
So I'll entertain a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of
Barry,
discussing
Katie had her hand
potential.
up.
I'm sorry?
Katie had her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see it, Katie.
That's okay. I'll just be quick. I just wanted to remind everybody to do the census if you have not yet. Enumerators are going to start going out on the 11th, which is about a week from today. And you can avoid that by taking the census ahead of time. You can do it online at census2020.gov. I think that's right. And there's also a phone number that you can call, which is 844-330-2020. So if you have not yet, all those people watching, taking your census, if you're a renter, particularly important, if you are a very civically engaged student who's watching our meeting right now, you count in our community, and we depend on you as part of our community to help us get the funding that we need for the next decade. So do the census. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else before I ask for a motion to go into executive session? Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing potential litigation. I have Councilmember Risberger moves it, Councilmember Harrington seconds. Just all in favor, raise your hand. Okay, Carrie, can you transport people into another universe? However you do this?
I can. Here you go.
Made it.
That was cool.
There's not much Zoom can't do, I don't think.
Gary, can I go ahead and discuss?
Yes, yeah, please do.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, Dave. So like I said before, planning committee has run into problems where we feel rushed with our meetings because we're at, and Len, I was incorrect when I emailed you earlier or texted you earlier. We're at 5 and finance is at 6. The easiest thing would be to just shift it on the same day. Does anybody have any objection to going to 4 o'clock for planning? Len, it would be tough for you once we're back at City Hall where you'd have an hour break, or anybody between that are on both of the committees. Either that or we need
Mark
to change
Mark
the day.
Davies and I are Mark Davies and I are on the committee of planning and then on finance and human resource. I don't know. I was just wondering if maybe we could, Mark, what do you think? Go to a different day? I mean,
yeah, well, making 4 o'clock would be difficult. I have a kind of 8 to 5 job now. So I would entertain a different day, or, maybe even pushing back finance by half an hour. I don't know if that half an hour would make a difference.
It might. See, the trouble we run into, Len, too, is, normally we have planning committee is usually a committee. The stuff we deal with is usually twice a month. And I wonder if that's going to go back to that once we're done with the COVID restrictions. And that impacts with DPW and engineering. So I would be, if we're going to make a total change in the day, I'd be hesitant without Greg's input on that. But it's really, I would say, if we're going to change the time of finance, you and Mark would have the biggest, would be impacted the most, since you'd have to go to both.
right. And it's a really long day. I think we've been averaging 2.5 hours for finance. That's why
You should
we
talk
were
to
all
the
laughing
finance
when I
chair
said
about
15.
that, Len.
Yeah, okay. You can talk to the city staff that comes up with that whole agenda for us.
Len, would it be bad to move finance to Tuesday? So you have the council meeting on a Tuesday, and the following week we did Tuesday for finance. That way.
Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting, is that maybe we go to a different day. John, would you be good with, say, looks like John would be okay. Yeah. Mark, would you be okay with that?
I'd be okay with it. The environmental board meets on the 2nd, or forget which Tuesday, but it'd be for some long nights, but we gotta do what we gotta do.
Okay.
So wait, Len, what days? I'm looking at the calendar here, and which days does finance meet? Is it the
first and third Mondays?
And you're talking about moving finance to when?
Tuesday, so it'd have to be the 2nd and 4th Tuesday. Do I have that right, Gary?
No, it's actually, you can't figure by first and third Monday because it depends how the week falls. If the first day of the month is on a Tuesday, it's the first Monday. If the first day of the month is on a Monday, then it's the second Monday. It's
all right. I guess I always look at it as we have financed the Monday after a common council.
Right.
The week after. So we
no,
just
actually, the way to look at that doesn't work all the time either, because of the 5 weeks in a month. Sometimes the only way to look at it is it's always the week before a common council meeting.
Oh, okay, a week before then.
But it varies you can't always count the number of Monday at the first or second.
Agreed. So that's a possibility, Dave, that we could just go to the Tuesday before the common council meeting and planning stays on that Monday.
If that works.
What about a movement of planning to 4:30 rather than 4?
That half an hour would probably make a difference.
That works for me, but how will that affect you, Mark? Would you be able to do that?
I think I can make that work.
And it
Okay.
works for me.
You guys want to try that for a little while?
Yeah.
Start at 4:30 with planning,
Mhm.
and then
I'm okay with
finance
that.
kicks off at 6.
If it turns out we can't do
Sure.
it, then
Let's come back to it.
we'll come back to the drawing board.
Okay.
All right, sounds good.
All right.
Okay. Before we adjourn, does anybody have anything else? Okay, with that, thank you all. A lot of good discussion. We are adjourned. Have a good night.